Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and producer Carrie, you know that I have been looking forward to this episode for a long time. I finally got Coach Jamie Riggs in here with me, and Coach Riggs, we're going to talk a lot about what you have done over the years, but I'm looking forward to this episode, so thanks for joining us.
I'm very glad to be here, Alan.
All right. Now, look, I know that like most great coaches, you don't like folks to talk about what you've done, but I just got to take a hot minute here and run through a couple of things. So, been in coaching for how many years? 30 something?
I quit counting.
It's a lot.
It's actually over 40 now, technically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I know most of your history from being at T.R. Miller. I graduated from T.R. Miller in 1991, and you were the head football coach there. And so you were at T.R. Miller for 27 years, won 293 games, 4 state championships, 4 state runner-up titles. Miller won 117 games in the 1990s, more than any other team in the state. 20 of the 27 teams, this is the most amazing stat to me, 20 of the 27 teams won at least 10 games. That's amazing. T.R. Miller was only shut out one time in 27 years, and that's 300-something games. So that's right. One time in 300-something games, you never scored a point. That's amazing. And then State Coach of the Year in 1994, 2000, and 2002. So I think you can probably speak pretty well on leadership and kind of how to motivate people based on the stats I just kind of rolled off there. So I'm excited about having you here, so I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. So just talk about coaching. Did you always want to be a coach? Have you always had that itch to kind of have that impact on people? How did you end up getting into coaching, and what led you to Miller ultimately?
I think probably, Alan, when I was in high school, I kind of thought about I might want to go in coaching, but I really thought that at some point in time I'd come to my senses, but I didn't. And I can remember this like it was yesterday. We were out on the practice field and practicing, and my dad went by in his milk truck.
Okay. He
worked for Dairy Fresh Milk. He went by in his milk truck, and I'm out there at practice, and I saw him, when the truck went by. And I thought to myself standing out there, for long I'll be doing that. I'll be out there, hitting the grind every day and everything. And I turned around and got back in line. And I looked over there, and Frank Cotton was standing over there. Mm-hmm. And Frank's out there coaching. And I thought, wouldn't that be great if that was my grind every day, if I could be out coaching and be a part of football and doing that. And I think that was probably the first time when I really gave some serious thought to maybe I wanted to be a coach.
Yeah, got it. Well, so you mentioned Frank Cotton. So he was coaching when you were in high school, is that right? One of your coaches?
Yeah, I spent probably the last 6 years of my schooling with Frank Cotton. He was our junior high. We were junior high in those days before we created middle school.
I got you.
He was my junior high PE teacher and social studies teacher.
Okay.
Yeah. He was also, and if we went to high school, he was obviously coaching me too. So I took driver's ed under him. So I spent a lot of time with him, and he had a lot of influence on the way I thought about things.
Yeah. So talk about that. That's what I was kind of getting at. So talk about whether it's Coach Cotton or some of your other coaches, maybe early on, what you learned from them and kind of what impact they had on you, and maybe how they shaped your philosophy about leadership or maybe just in life in general,
Well, we haven't had a lot of football coaches at T.R. Miller if you go back over the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I stayed over half that time, it's been a good place to coach. People would generally come and stay a few years and that kind of thing. But I played for 3 different head coaches when I was in school. The first one was Matt Wood. Matt Wood's a tremendous coach. Coached our 69 state championship team. And the thing I learned from Coach Wood, he was my coach my 9th and 10th grade year. The number one thing I learned from him was that football was a tough game. It needed to be played and coached by tough people. Mm-hmm. And in later years, I would worry sometimes maybe my teams aren't tough enough. I wonder if Coach Wood would be proud of what I had done. And I learned that from him. It was a really valuable lesson, to do. And then my junior year, our head coach was a guy named Larry Rampy, and he came. He was only with us 1 year. He got killed in an automobile accident in February of 1973. But he taught me the importance of building confidence in people. And he worked us unlike anything I had ever seen at that time. He worked us to death. And going into that season, we had a lot of confidence. We were going to be a good team because we had never worked like this before, and we were stronger and faster and tougher, and we just felt that. And I learned that from him about confidence. And then my senior year, after Coach Rampy passed away, we had Frank Cotton. And Coach Cotton's taught me the importance of motivating players, that it's fine to be strong and fast and do all these things, in football. but they need to be motivated to play. And he was the number one motivator that I've ever been around in my entire career. I learned a great deal about dealing with people from Coach Cotton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there was another guy, we had an assistant coach named Larry Mickwee. And Larry was really enthusiastic about everything. And I learned enthusiasm from him, the importance of showing up every day with a positive attitude. And Larry taught Spanish, and the Spanish classes in those days were full at T.R. Miller High School, not because we cared anything at all about learning Spanish, but because everybody wanted to be in his class. Okay. You know, he made it fun. He made it exciting. So I had some really quality people that I learned from.
Yeah, that's great. Coach Cotton was my principal, by the way, when I was in high school. Love Coach Cotton. He's passed on now, which big loss to this community. But I don't think you can run to anybody in Bruton who ever crossed paths with him that didn't either they've got a story or they learned some kind of life lesson from Coach. He was outstanding.
And all the stories are true.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, you would say, "Oh, that's not." Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's really true. But
Absolutely.
he was tremendous fun to play for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just really, really great. And I have great memories of him.
Yeah, that's great. One thing just hit me when you were talking. So Miller's won 6 state championships in its history. You're part of all 6 of them.
Well,
right?
Technically, I wasn't in the 1969 when I was in the 8th grade.
So you were the year before. I guess you would have made it to varsity.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so I was 1 year away
You were
from
on the
all that.
outskirts,
But I was an assistant coach in '84, and then
Right, for Mike Sasser. Yeah. Okay, good. So talk about leadership. It's obvious that you were doing something to motivate players because of the success you had. So what do you consider your leadership style? I mean, what's your philosophy when it comes to how to lead what through your career as being young men for the most part?
Well, I was also the athletic director at T.R. Miller,
Mm-hmm.
so it gave me kind of some different perspectives of things because, as a football coach, you always think tough and mean,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. But I really think that the best leaders are people that can do it more than one way because there are times that you need to take charge and be in control and run the show today and so forth. And there are times when things are going well that I would just kind of back up and let, everybody in leadership needs good number 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
The captain's right under you. The leadership, that administrative group right under you is important. And there were times things were going well. I would just kind of back up, kind of let them handle some things, let the players kind of take control of what's going on. The best teams I ever had, the players by the end of the season had basically taken over the team. Mm-hmm. And I was just kind of organizing practice and making a few calls, and my coaches were doing, and we were just actually, they were going forward. We were just kind of hanging on to them. And so that's really what you work for and hope for. So I think you got to be able to do a little bit of all of that.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this, and this I love anytime I think about this, it just makes me laugh. So Roger Chapman, you and I both know Roger. He used to call football games for the Tigers back on the radio in the day. And so every August, I would say, Roger either had the program for Rotary or he would swap and get the program because he wanted to have you come in and talk about the state of T.R. Miller football, okay? And I was in Rotary for many years and heard a lot of your speeches. I don't think I ever, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I ever heard you say, Miller's got it going on this year. We got a great team. We're going to be okay. It was always, we're smaller. We don't have a lot of talent. We got a lot of improvement to do. We're not that good. And I'll be dogged, most time he went and won the state championship that year. So what? And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but that is the way that you kind of present it to us. Is like, it's going to be a rough year, guys, and then you win 14 games and 14-1, and you won the state championship. So was that? Obviously, it was intentional. So was that part of your kind of MO to kind of pour mouth a little bit and keep folks to be unexpected? What was that about?
Well, a lot of years you do want to underplay a little bit. Some of those years I was really telling the truth. I didn't think we were going to be very good and all. But I tell you, most of the things that I believed in coaching, I learned along the way from somebody else or by making mistakes myself. And when I was a very young coach, I was in Mobile coaching at McGill-Tulane. There was a coach at UMS that year. He came out in the paper before the season started and said, we're going to have a great team. If we don't have a great team this year and go to the playoffs and do this, they really all just fire me. And they didn't have a great year. And at the end of the year, they fired him. So I thought, well, that doesn't seem to be the direction to go. So I'm just going to kind of underplay things and go from there.
Yeah, understood. Well, and the reason I asked that question is seriously, I mean, being a city school system in a smaller town, really you did kind of have to play with the guys that came out, right? So T.R. Miller was always kind of smaller, a little bit smaller than everybody else. may not have had the most skilled people at these skilled positions, but you always seem to be able to take that talent and mold them to have some success. So what did that look like? How did you motivate them to be able to believe in themselves when everybody else might have looked at them and said, oh, there's no way, you guys are too small, you're not fast enough, whatever?
I was a believer in what I call the high school football experience. I wanted all our guys to have a great experience. And part of that was the spirit of football, which I thought was a really big thing, and school spirit and team spirit. And, unlike most football coaches, I like the band. They bring the music. And the players, liked the music, and they liked it when they played at the games. And, that was always part of the whole spirit thing, and they always talked good about the band. Every once in a while, some of the band directors let me come out there and talk to the band preseason, and fire them up a little bit and all that kind of thing. But I just believed that the spirit deal was a big deal. We had great tradition, and we preached that tradition. And one of the things about being around so long is when we would hit a tough spot or a rough spot, I could relay, and the same thing happened to us 4 or 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. This is what we did. Here's the people that were involved in changing that around. And they knew these people. These people were their brothers and their cousins and lived next door to them. And a lot of our players had grown up coming to the games, with that same experience as a fan. That's what I had done when I was growing up. And so because of all of that, I just think that it was more important to our guys than it was to other guys. The ability we had a saying and a sign on the wall that says play for T.R. Miller. And we really, really believed that's what we were going to do. We were going to play for our school. And then finally I would tell you our job was to build teams. Yeah. And so we're trying to build a team that cares about each other and is going to work hard and going to play for their school. And I said on many occasions, nobody can come together and play this great, impossible game and win like T.R. Miller can, and every once in a while we would prove it. We would play somebody that we're not really supposed to beat, and not only did we beat them occasionally, we beat them pretty good occasionally. Yeah. So it was a great experience. But I had good people involved in all that, from the coaches to the players, just a lot of good people. Yeah,
there's no doubt. I mean, over your years, you would look down on a Friday night and see little boys running around playing football with either a paper cup or a little football that the cheerleaders throw. They would throw after a touchdown, and in 10 or 12 years, you'd look up and they'd be the starting quarterback or a wide receiver or a running back. So that tradition, you're right, has been something that's been very special about T.R. Miller. Look back and tell me, I don't have to name names necessarily, but when you look back at some of those guys that really took charge and really were leaders on teams throughout the years, what were some of the qualities that stand out to you that they possessed that would make people want to follow in behind them? And I'm talking about at the player level.
Leaders, as far as players go, some of them lead vocally. Mm-hmm. They're the ones going to stand up. Something's not going right. Say, guys, we got to do this or we need to do that. They're sitting in the cafeteria at lunch, saying, hey, we need to have good practice today. They lead vocally some. There are some of them that just lead by example. They tried so hard. They practiced so hard. Their enthusiasm for our team was just so great that other people looked at them and said, wow, this is a guy we want to follow. And so early when I came back to Miller, we had some folks who really stood up and did that. Now, it's harder to do today than any time before, but Gerald Thomas and Willie Smith were two of our great players then, and the guys just followed them. They really did. They just followed them. The second year I was there in 1990, I think your senior year, Shane Sasser was our quarterback. Shane was about 5'0", about 100 pounds, but was this great leader. And Shane wasn't real vocal. He wasn't real vocal out there, but it meant so much to him. And I still remember one day at practice out there, if something happened, didn't go right or whatever, and something happened. It was like the second time or third time in a row it had happened, and Shane about had enough of it. He slammed the ball down and he cussed. And everybody went, wow, what? And everybody just kind of backed up for a minute. This is not like him. And he said he'd had enough of this. We need to do this. And, man, from that point on, the rest of the day, it was great, And so sometimes you have those kind of guys. They were great. One of the best ones I ever had back in the mid-'90s, I had a player named Tristan Moore. Tristan was about 5'5" or something like that, weighed about 150 pounds, but he was a tremendous player. And he was real enthusiastic, and the players loved him, and the players followed him. And he could get them stirred up like nobody else could. So sometimes, it's by being vocal. Sometimes it's just by what you do on a daily basis, and that's been really important because we've had some really good ones down through the years.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Shane. He and I did graduate together, and 1990 was the beginning of that just amazing run of the 1990s. We made it to the championship game at Deschler, got out to a 14-0 lead, and then they let them come back and ended up tying the game at the end, winning overtime. They scored. We came back and scored and had an extra point attempt to tie the game again and extend the game and missed it. And ended up finishing second in the state that year. But that was you talk about dejected, man. I mean, that was awful. But came back next year and then beat the eyes out of Deschler for the championship the next year in 91 for the first state championship, I guess, that you won of the four, right?
Yeah.
So talk about kind of leading through adversity and what that message was about. You work so hard, you come so close, you fall a little bit short, but you got to get up the next year and you got to try again, right? So what was that?
Yeah,
what was that message?
I think the reason we won in 91 was our response to what happened in 1990, and tremendous game, one of the great games in championship football history. It was just a tremendous game. Two really good teams. Deschler had set the record that year for the most points scored in a season. I mean, just great game. We were obviously dejected when the thing got over, and not only that, we got to get on a bus and ride the entire length of the state of Alabama to get home.
That was a long trip.
Yeah, we all got to think about that. Our seniors handled it with grace. You know, we missed the extra point, and so obviously our kicker feels pretty bad. The kids handled it with grace and with a lot of class, and I think that's what helped us the next year. You know, and. But our guys that were seniors the next year were pretty determined we were going to get back. They know we were going to win or not, but we're going to get back. And just really strange that the next year we both went undefeated, us and Deschler. Went all the way to the final game, and they had won 28 games in a row. And the difference this year is now the game's in Bruton.
Right.
If you remember, Alan, it was a big deal. You know, and the churches helped feed the people from Tuscumbia. I mean, it was a really big deal, and you know, everybody was so excited about the game. And so, you know, the game starts, and they drive down and score right off the bat, and it's like, boom, okay, here we go again. And I think we ended up winning 46-6.
Yeah, it was not close.
Yeah, and we just took control of the game, and we got a little fortunate that night in that it had been a pretty cool fall, but there was a storm coming in like on Saturday, and it had warmed like it does, getting ready to rain. The humidity was up, and Deschler really suffered that night. And we didn't suffer quite as bad.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and it goes to, I think that's a good lesson in, the hospitality that the folks of Bruton showed those folks from Deschler. I mean, they talked about it that kind of was a little rivalry. I don't know how many times we ended up playing them over the next few years, but Deschler folks always talked about the way they were treated when they came to Bruton.
And we tried to do that because if you remember, we had a big fight up there after the game up there. I believe Tony Burnham was in charge of that fight. But
yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Tony. So David Jennings was a guest on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him about this, and he did not agree with your assessment. But I happen to know that you credit Tony Burnham with saving your job at T.R. Miller, and so the storied career that you've had at Miller, you say would probably have not taken place had it not been for Tony. So tell that story and why you give Tony all the credit for saving your job.
Well, the first year I came to Miller in 1989, I take over, and we lost like the first 3 games. You know, close games all, but we've lost the first 3 games. I still remember Becky, my wife, asking me, are we going to win? You know, we've always won here, and now you're not winning. Are we going to win? So we go down to play Atmore, and I need a win in the worst way. You know, and so one of those really close games. Well, right at 2 minutes left in the game, we scored, go ahead, and they've got the ball. And so I'm feeling pretty good now. And they gradually start throwing passes, and they're getting closer, but time's running short. Well, Tony Burnham was our nose guard. And Tony was certainly one of the 2 meanest people to ever play at T.R. Miller High School. I would say that. And time's running out, and there's like 15, 20 seconds left in the game. They throw a pass, and the guy from Atmore dives and catches it and hits on the 1 yard line and skids into the end zone, and they mark the ball on the 1 yard line. Well, everybody looked up, and there's like 1 or 2 seconds left. They're out of timeouts. So all we can all do is run back down there and get to the goal line, and they're going to snap the ball. And that's what they do. They run down there. They blow the whistle in play. They snap the ball immediately, and they didn't really even have time to call a play. The quarterback was just going to run quarterback sneak. And he steps to run the quarterback sneak, and Tony grabbed him and threw him back there on about the 5-yard line, and we won the game. So I used to tell Tony all the time, I said, they were going to fire me on Monday if we lost that game. I said, you saved my job and all. So anyway, we went on a nice winning streak after that, and it all turned out well. So
I would say, that was definitely the start of one of the greatest 10-year spans of football in Alabama history for sure. So, David Jennings, I just want you to know, takes great chagrin in the fact that you credit Tony for saving your job. I don't think David doesn't appreciate that at all, and does not agree with it, by the way. But anyway, that's great. So talk about those great teams of the 90s. And I don't want to make you label one as the best, but certainly that 1994 team was special. I mean, is there one team, and maybe it's not a state championship team, but is there one team that kind of stands out in your memory as one of the greats for whatever reason? I mean, because of the leadership, the people, the stories, the way that you won the games. Do you have a team that you can point to?
Every team we had was different. Mm-hmm. They had different personalities, different skills. They had different quarterbacks, different strengths, different weaknesses. Yet every team was alike in that they all played for Miller, and it was an important thing and that kind of thing. And I think probably Scott Sasser, who was my quarterback in 1995, probably expressed that the best. When we won the state championship in 2000, he wrote me a letter, and he said, it's good to see Miller back on top. He said, I noticed that all the teams are always different, but they're always the same because they always play with the same enthusiasm, and they all look very similar, even though they're very different. Mm-hmm. And I appreciated, his sentiments on that, and it was really true. We had good players. I had good coaches, and at times I was smart enough just to get out of the way and just let it happen. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them were a little more volatile than others. We had some pretty good, interesting people on our teams and everything. But I think more than anything else, I would have college coaches come by and they'd watch us, and they say that you guys practice better than anybody we see. And we put a lot of time into practice, a lot of effort into practice. And I always believed if you practiced right, the games would take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. I really didn't want to get down to the end of the game and I've got to make a call that's going to win or lose the game. I would rather us do such a great job at practice that maybe it won't come down to that. Mm-hmm. It won't come down. Obviously it does sometimes, but that it wouldn't come down to that. So we took a great deal of pride in how we practiced. We put a lot of time in it. And we were, I think, very prepared for games. Mm-hmm. Not only physically, but mentally prepared for games. You'll go back and look at the history of all these teams over the years. We lost very few games we should have probably won. Mm-hmm. If we're supposed to beat somebody, we generally beat them. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And the tradition had a great deal about, in 1997, I'm talking about the team from 4 or 5 years ago.
Right, yeah.
And again, I think that had a lot to do with our success.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that amazes me, too, is you had such continuity on your coaching staff. I mean, you had some great assistant coaches that stayed for years and years and years that really would have been, I think they would have been, and some did go on to be, very successful head coaches at other places, but they decided to, for whatever reason, stay and coach at Miller. And I think a lot of that's got to do maybe with the tradition and the program that you helped establish. And what is your take on that?
Absolutely. And everybody likes to win.
Right.
Now, you're not going to win them all, but everybody liked to win, and we were being successful. We had players and the players, the coaches on my staff had great rapport. Mm-hmm. A lot of respect between them and so forth. Now, we coached it pretty aggressively. I mean, you could get on somebody pretty hard, and we expect them to be tough enough to handle it and do that. And we worked them extremely hard. But there was just a great rapport with all of that. And if you can maintain that, it can last. Mm-hmm. And I think Andalusia is probably a great example. When I was in high school in the early 70s, mid-70s, all through the 70s, Andalusia was just tremendous. Every year they're close to playing for a state championship and all that. Yeah. Then in the 80s, they started swapping coaches a lot, and it made a difference. Yeah. And their program generally started going down some because of that, but we've been able to maintain a lot of that continuity, and I think that had a lot to do with our success. Yeah.
I need to wrap up here in just a second, but I do have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, so you've been in coaching for a long time. How has it changed? You just retired from Houston Academy, being their head coach for 3 years after you left Miller. So what is different about coaching a young man today than it was maybe, in '88 or '89, your first year at Miller, even just 30 years ago. Is there a difference? I mean, do you have to approach it differently? I'm just asking because you always hear, kids today, they're disrespectful. They got too many things trying to vie for their attention. I mean, what's your take on that?
My take on that has always been that the players really haven't changed. Their surroundings have changed,
Okay.
and their parents have changed.
Okay.
A young man that we had who had grown up in Bruton and wanted to play for T.R. Miller, he played just as hard. And my last year was 2015. He played just as hard in 2015 he did in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the game had changed. The rules have changed, allowed you to use your hands and things. And really since about 2005, the last 15 years, football has changed more than it probably did in the previous 50 years.
Yeah.
Just with the rule changes and different things going on, all the concussion stuff that is done, all the litigation and things that require you to be aware of so many things these days, and with players and so forth. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It just required more of it. It changed the way you looked at the game and things. Technology has changed the game. I spent no telling how long driving in my old truck swapping films with other coaches because we're playing somebody this week. We'd go on Saturday the week before and swap films with them, and the last few years we're doing all that on the internet, immediately and instantaneously. And a lot of things have just changed. I think one of the things about being a leader is that as your situation changes, as things change, you got to be creative and be willing to change with it.
Yeah.
If you don't, you get left behind. I think at times I was a little bit slow to change with some things because I had so much success with the other, but you got to be willing to do that.
Yeah. Had the iPads made it on the sideline when you left, or was that a year after?
Yeah,
year or two after you left?
Year or two after that.
Okay. I mean, Miller has always been very, very fortunate. I think we have a very active athletic club, and has always been all the programs, band, football, baseball, name it, the choir. They've all been very well supported by the administration. But I never thought I'd look down on the high school sideline and see the same kind of setup that they have on colleges. I mean, my son was kind of helped with the video the last couple of years of high school, and so they were all down. Coach Edge would be down there looking at the last play on iPads. They call the defense over there, and you say they had a big TV. They were watching real time video. It's amazing.
And the High School Athletic Association really was late doing that a little bit because their take on it was always they didn't want money to be able to determine victory. In other words, some schools obviously can afford to do what other schools can't, and they didn't want them to gain the advantage. But I think they finally got to the technology point. They felt like that most schools are going to be able to handle this now because most everybody's, has computers, iPads, or whatever, to be able to do that. So they finally went to that.
Yeah.
And
well, I got two more. I lied. I got two more questions. So the first one is, and this might be hard, but is there one particular game, and it could be, maybe it was win number 300. I mean, whatever. Is there one particular game that sticks out in your mind over your career that just, when somebody asks the question I'm asking now, give me that one game that you keep coming back to? Is there one that pops into your head?
The 1995 Miller-Neal game.
Okay.
We were both undefeated. Neal had a tremendous team. Strong, fast. They dominated everyone. We had won the state championship the year before, going 15-0. We had a run through the season undefeated. And there's this collision coming that everybody's been able to see for 5 or 6 weeks. I mean, it's coming. It's the last game of the year, and it's coming. Everybody anticipated it. And we both finished, undefeated. It's the 10th game. We're playing at Neal, and we played at the old stadium. And I loved the old stadium at Neal. I mean, I hated when they built the new one because the old one was so small and compact. And they had a pine tree down there in the corner, big old pine tree. And usually when we'd play down there in November, there'd be like green pine cones and stuff down there. And the kids, we'd be warming up, and they'd be throwing pine cones. That's why we were warming up. I mean, you can't make that stuff up, And the night we played, the most tremendous crowd imaginable. Literally, people were getting to the game at noon that day and trying to save seats. And it was 6 deep around the fence. We literally had to fight our way to get to the field to warm up. And I still remember we're walking out there the field. We're trying to fight through to get through, and you had to come through the Neal side first to get over there. And they're just hollering at us and screaming at us, and it was just great, man. I love that stuff. And it was a great game. It had rained most of the week. The field was real muggy, and it went right down to the the end of the game. And that game contained what I consider to be the greatest play in T.R. Miller football history.
Okay.
When we're behind and they have the ball around midfield and their guy runs the ball, and Jeremy Bradley goes to tackle him and grabs the ball and takes it away from him. And on the next play, we threw a touchdown pass to go ahead, which gave us the win. But the takeaway is the most brilliant play that I'd ever seen or ever been a part of. And so just a great, great game. We met in the playoffs in the semifinal a few weeks later. We beat them about 20 points the second time, but they had a great, great team.
Yeah, that's great. You're right, but I'd forgotten about that. I graduated from college that year, but working and couldn't come home. But I remember stories of that game, and that is a good one for sure.
And the communities were just nuts. I mean, they were just nuts. I mean, for the 2 weeks before the game till we played in the semifinal for just about 6 weeks, the whole town, it was nothing but football, and it was just everybody went crazy. It was great.
Yeah, that is a great rivalry and a lot of great stories like that. So thanks for that. All right, so people are would hunt me down and beat me if I didn't ask this question. So you retired from Miller, went to Houston Academy, coached for 3 years, retired from there. So what's next for Coach Riggs? And what's your plan? I don't want to ask for any trade secrets or anything, but I mean, what are you enjoying retired life so far? What's the next iteration of Coach Jamie Riggs' career going to look like?
You know, when you've been in school basically your whole life, you're on this time schedule. Yeah. Bells ring. I got a class here. I got practice here. And when you retire, there's no more bells. Mm-hmm. And so some of that is nice. Yeah. And, I got back into coaching a little bit just because I miss coaching some. And I was looking kind of for another challenge to be able to do. It allowed me to go and save a little money and do some things, then Becky and I have some things. We want to travel and go do some things. So we're going to be doing some of that. I basically, my last 3 or 4 years at Miller before the games, I started writing a little blog thing called A Minute with Coach Riggs, and so I enjoyed that. I started that, Alan, because I really thought the players would enjoy reading it, and it didn't take me long to figure out the players weren't reading it, but all the parents were.
Oh, man, the community went nuts for that when you started doing that,
Yeah, and so they started doing that. Well, after I retired, I've added a few more short stories. I'm putting them together, and so I hope to publish a book of it.
That's great.
And so I've got that to work on and try to get that done. I don't anticipate coaching again, but how old coaches are. We never say never, but I don't anticipate doing that again. But I enjoyed Dothan. We were over there for 3 years, but I've really enjoyed getting back to Brute now and seeing people again and that kind of thing. So hopefully we can do some things like that that'll keep me busy and.
Well, no doubt. And your son Michael's a coach, so I would not be surprised to see you roaming around on one of his sidelines at some point, just kind of talk about a resource, man. I mean, you're a great resource. I'm sure Michael, I know he has taken advantage of it and probably will as well in the future. So.
Well, we hope so. And I think that, we had a reunion this year of the 2000 state championship team. And my youngest son, Will did a video. And we had already done these for some of the other championship teams where we interviewed some of the players and mixed it in with video of the games and just told the story of the season. But I think you can go on YouTube now, and I think that's posted on YouTube now to be able to do and go and see that. And people might want to go over and see that. It's really, really, really good and interesting to listen to players 20 years later and how emotional they are about it. 20 years later and what it's meant to their lives and how they use some of the things that they learned in football.
Yeah, and it gets right back to what David Jennings said 2 weeks ago. It's a sport, yes, but it's also a life lesson. If you go through everything that you went through and the players went through and don't learn something that you can apply to your life, I mean, you might have won a game, but is it really a victory? Probably not, unless you have something you can apply to your everyday life. So that's great.
That was part of the experience that I talked about earlier. We wanted you to leave with something you take with you that'll be really important to you and so forth and everything. And I kind of leave you a little story. Several years ago, I ran into a former player. He had, during the time he was in high school, he had some issues and problems and ran into a few, just had some problems here and there and everything. He had kind of straightened himself up as an adult. He had a good job, had a family, and he had really done well. And it was really important to him that I understand that he thought that part of the reason he had done that is because he had played football. And it was important to him that I understand how much of a success that he had become. And I just love spending time with him, and he's just done really well. And so we hope that they learn some things that will help them in the long run to be able to do some of that.
No doubt, Coach. Thank you so much. This has been great. You were one of the legends and have helped make T.R. Miller what it is, and so I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.